HOA tried selling my cabin without permission, so I put up my own bold sign. HOA tried selling my cabin without permission, so I put up my own bold sign. But what happened next was nothing I could have ever imagined. A simple wooden board on my gate turned into a weapon, a message that shook the entire neighborhood and exposed secrets the HOA wanted buried forever. And when the truth came out, someone disappeared. Welcome back to HOA Stories. I'm David, a simple man living in the quiet suburbs of North Carolina. I work as a carpenter. And this cabin I built with my own hands, it was supposed to be my safe place, my escape from the city noise. But the HOA saw it differently. To them, it was nothing more than a problem to erase. And this is the story of how they went too far, and how one bold sign changed everything. I said this cabin was my safe place, my little world, built with my own hands. But the moment I saw that paper on my gate, everything changed. It was early morning. The sun was low, golden light falling on the trees, and there it was, taped right across my wooden gate, a paper, bold red letters screaming at me, "For sale." I froze. I remember touching the paper, my fingers shaking, my heart beating like a hammer in my chest, because this was my home, my land, my escape from the noise of the city. And yet here it was, listed for strangers to buy. As if I didn't exist, I thought it was a mistake. It had to be a mistake. But then I saw the name printed at the bottom. Not my name, the HOA's name. My head went blank. I could not understand how they dared to do this. This was not just a house. This was every drop of sweat from my hands, every nail I hammered into the wood, every night I spent building walls when everyone else was asleep. This cabin was me, and now they had put me on the market. I stood there staring at that paper until I heard voices. Two people, walking slowly across the path near my land. One of them was holding a sheet of paper, pointing toward my windows. The other nodded. Whispering something, I stepped closer, and before I even asked, I knew they were potential buyers. I asked them who they were, what they were doing here, and they looked at me, surprised, almost annoyed. One of them said, "We saw this property online. It's listed. We were told it's for sale." I wanted to laugh, and I did. But it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh you give when anger is burning so deep inside you, because it was madness. The HOA had gone from sending fines to threatening letters, and now this, listing my home like I was invisible. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in my cabin, the fire glowing in the old fireplace, but I couldn't feel its warmth anymore. Every sound outside felt like footsteps. Every shadow on the wall felt like someone watching. I realized I was no longer safe in the place I built for safety. The next morning I marched into the HOA office. The room smelled of fresh paint and fake flowers. The president sat behind her shiny desk, her nails painted blood red, her smile sharp and thin like a knife. I dropped the letter on her desk and asked her what this was. She looked at me, calm, too calm, and said, "It's business. If you don't like it, maybe this neighborhood isn't for you." Her words cut through me. I wanted to shout, but I knew that's what she wanted, because to her, this wasn't about rules anymore. It was about power, control, erasing me from the place I called home. I walked out of that office, my blood boiling. Neighbors stared at me as I passed, some with pity, some with curiosity. I wondered how many of them already knew, how many of them had seen my cabin listed, how many of them were waiting for me to disappear. But instead of breaking down, I felt something else rise inside me, a fire, a decision. If they wanted me gone, they would have to fight for it, and I wasn't planning on losing, so I went to the hardware store, picked up a large wooden board, a brush, black paint. The cashier asked me if I was building something new. I looked him in the eye and said, "No, I'm protecting what's mine." When I came back, I laid that board across two sawhorses. The paint dripped as I brushed the words slow and heavy. Private property, not for sale, no HOA. Each letter was bold, black, angry. Each stroke of the brush felt like I was carving my voice into the wood, a voice they could not silence. By evening, the sun was low again. I carried the board to my gate. The wood was heavy, but not heavier than the anger inside me. I raised the hammer, nailed it in place. Each strike echoed across the empty street like thunder, and when I stepped back, I saw it, Not just a sign, but a warning, a shield, and maybe even a declaration of war. I stood there, breathing hard, watching the paint glisten under the last light of the day. I didn't know how the HOA would react, but I knew they couldn't ignore it, for the first time in days. I felt peace, not because the fight was over, but because it had finally begun. Now let me ask you this. If this happened to you, if the HOA tried to sell your home without your permission, would you fight back like I did, with your own bold sign, or would you walk away and let them win? The next morning, I woke up to the sound of car doors slamming outside my gate. I pulled the curtain just enough to see, and there, he was, the HOA president, standing tall in her polished heels, her sunglasses reflecting my new sign like a mirror of hate beside her. 2 board members whispered, pointing at my gate. One of them took out his phone and snapped pictures. The other wrote something down on a clipboard. It felt like I was watching vultures circle over prey. I stepped out, slow, calm, but inside I was boiling. She looked at me, her smile thin as ever, and said, "This is a violation, unauthorized structure on your property." Her voice was sweet on the surface, but filled with poison underneath. I laughed. I told her, "This is not a violation. This is my land, my rules." The smirk on her face faded for just a second, but then she leaned closer to the gate and whispered, "You have no idea who you're fighting against." They left after snapping more pictures, but I knew this was only the beginning. By afternoon, a letter appeared in my mailbox, an official notice from the HOA. They demanded I remove the sign within 48 hours. If not, daily fines would begin, hundreds of dollars, piling up, until I was buried in debt. I sat at my table, staring at that paper. My cabin walls around me felt tighter, smaller, as if they were trying to crush me with invisible hands, but I wasn't backing down. Not this time. Because this fight wasn't just about a sign, it was about control, about standing against people who thought they owned everyone's lives. I decided to test them. That evening, I added another line to the board. In bold black paint I wrote, "Trespassers will be reported." I wanted them to see it from the road. I wanted them to know that I wasn't scared. The next day, things got darker. A black SUV parked near the edge of my property. It didn't move for hours. I saw a man sitting inside, staring straight at the cabin. When I stepped outside, he rolled up the window and drove away, but something told me he would be back. The neighbors began to notice too. Some of them came by, quietly whispering their support. One woman told me she admired the sign, said she wished she had the courage to do the same. Another man warned me that the HOA had done similar things before. He said, "They play dirty. You should be careful." But others stayed silent. They passed by quickly, eyes down, pretending they saw nothing. Fear was stronger than loyalty in this neighborhood. That night, I found another note slipped under my cabin door. It wasn't official, it was handwritten. The words made my blood run cold. "Take the sign down, or we'll take it down for you." The handwriting was messy, but the meaning was clear. They were done with threats. They were ready for action. I walked to the gate in the dark, lantern in my hand. The sign stood tall in the night wind, the paint still bold, unshaken. But I could feel the weight of unseen eyes on me. I stood there, and I asked myself, how far were they willing to go? How much were they ready to risk just to silence me? And more importantly, how far was I ready to go to fight back? Now tell me, if someone left a threat like this on your door, would you give in and take the sign down to stay safe? Or would you stand your ground and dare them to try? The night after that note, I barely slept. Every creak of the cabin floor, every rustle of leaves outside, felt like footsteps creeping dawn. I stepped outside to check the gate, the sig closer. The words on that paper kept burning in my mind. Take the sign down, or we'll take it down for you. The window with a lantern on the table, a hammer in my hand, the cabin was silent. Except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall, minutes felt like hours, and hours felt like days. Bayen was still there, standing tall, untouched, but the ground beneath it showed fresh footprints in the dirt. Someone had been here, watching me in the dark, close enough to touch my fence, close enough to rip the sign down. But they didn't. Not yet. That morning, another letter came from the HOA. This one wasn't just a fine, it was a notice of legal action. They claimed my cabin was abandoned property. They claimed I was not maintaining it properly, and therefore, the HOA had the right to seize and resell it, abandoned. That word cut deep. I lived here every single day. This cabin was more alive than any of the fake plastic houses they bragged about, but on paper, they were twisting everything. On paper, they were trying to erase me. I stormed into the office again, but this time, people were watching. Neighbors stood outside pretending to check their mail, their eyes following me as I walked in. The president didn't even look surprised. She said, "We gave you a chance. You chose war." Her voice calm, steady, almost amused. And I realized then, she wanted this fight, because the more I resisted, the more power she thought she gained. I walked out without saying a word, but inside me, something broke. Fear was gone. All that was left was rage. That evening, I added another piece to the sign, this time with red paint. Letters dripping like blood. Stop trespassing. Stop lying. Stop the HOA. The next morning, people stopped on the street to take pictures. Some laughed, some whispered, some clapped quietly when they thought nobody was watching. For the first time, my neighbors weren't just seeing a cabin. They were seeing a symbol. My sign wasn't just mine anymore. It was theirs too, but symbols attract enemies, and by nightfall, I heard voices outside my gate, whispers, footsteps. The sound of metal rattling. I grabbed my lantern and rushed out. 3 figures stood there, hoods over their heads. One of them had a crowbar in his hand, pointed right at my sign. I shouted, and they froze for a moment. Then one of them said, "This is your last warning." Their voices disguised, low and threatening. They didn't wait for me to answer. They just turned and melted back into the dark street. The silence after they left was worse than the threat itself, because silence means planning, and I knew, the next time, they wouldn't just come with words. I stood at that gate for hours, watching the shadows move across the road. Every sound echoed louder than usual. Every gust of wind carried fear with it, but my sign stood firm, and so did I. Now here's what I want to ask you. If you saw 3 masked people outside your home, threatening you, ready to destroy what you built, would you chase them away and risk it all? Or would you hide inside and pray they never return? The night after the masked figures came, I knew sleep would not find me. Every corner of my cabin felt heavy. Every shadow looked alive. I sat by the window with the lantern burning low, gripping the hammer I had used to nail that sign, not as a tool now, but as a weapon. When the sun finally rose, my eyes were red, my hands stiff from holding on all night, and then I saw it, another paper nailed right below my own sign. The handwriting was the same as before, jagged, rushed. It said, "This is your final chance." Final chance for what? To give up, to disappear quietly so they could take my cabin. The nerve of it made me laugh, but it wasn't joy. It was anger so deep it turned into something else, a kind of calm fury. I tore the note down and burned it in the fireplace. If they wanted me scared, they would not get that satisfaction. Later that day, I noticed something strange. A few of my neighbors began avoiding eye contact. People I had known for years suddenly crossing the street when they saw me. Even children who used to wave at me were pulled away quickly by their parents. It felt like the neighborhood was turning into a stage, and I was the villain in their play. The HOA was twisting the story, painting me as dangerous, unstable, unfit to live here by afternoon. Another SUV rolled slowly past my cabin. This time it didn't stop. It just crawled along the road, windows tinted black. I could feel the eyes watching me even though I couldn't see them, and then it was gone, like a shadow fading into the day. That evening, I decided to stand outside by the gate. If they wanted to watch me, then I would watch them right back. The air was cold, the sky heavy with clouds, and as I stood there, I noticed something unusual, another sign, a small one, nailed to a tree across the street. It was new, it had bold letters on it, community property. My stomach dropped. They were claiming the land around my cabin now, trying to blur the lines. To make people believe my home wasn't mine anymore, I ripped that sign down too, threw it into the dirt. But the message was clear. They weren't just after my cabin. They were after the story, the illusion, the control. That night, the threats finally turned physical. I was in bed when I heard the sound of metal scraping against wood. I rushed outside with the lantern. My gate was shaking. Someone had tried to pry the sign off with a crowbar, fresh marks across the edges of the board. But they hadn't finished. They had run the moment they heard me. I stood there under the pale moonlight, my breath sharp in the cold air, and I realized something chilling. They weren't just testing me, they were enjoying this game. Each step meant to push me closer to breaking, closer to surrender. But I am not the kind of man who surrenders, so I made a decision. I added a new line to my board. This time, in deep red paint, "Trespassers will be filmed." And I meant it. I set up an old camera on the cabin porch, its little red light blinking into the night. If they came again, the whole world would see. Still, I couldn't shake the unease, because cameras can capture faces, but they can't stop hands from burning down wood. As I stared at my cabin in the dark, I couldn't help but wonder, how far were they truly willing to go, and how far would I have to go to stop them? So let me ask you this. If your home was under attack like mine, if every night was a test of fear and fire, would you call the police and trust the system? Or would you take matters into your own hands and fight back? The red paint on my sign had barely dried. When the war changed shape, it was no longer just about threats in the night. It became something quieter, something colder, psychological. I woke up one morning to find 3 envelopes stuffed under my cabin door. No stamps, no names, just plain white. Inside each one was a photograph of my cabin, taken from different angles, one in the morning light, one at dusk, one at night. With my bedroom window glowing, they were watching me around the clock, and they wanted me to know it. I burned those photographs in the fireplace. But the image of them stayed in my head. Every creak of the floorboards made me wonder, was someone standing outside right now, camera in hand? Later that week, I discovered something worse. My mailbox had been filled with fake letters, official low. Oaking papers stamped with HOA seals, each one claiming I owed thousands of dollars in community fees. Some even threatened foreclosure if I didn't comply. But I knew the truth. They weren't real. They were printed to scare me, to make me doubt myself, to weaken my resolve. Still, seeing those bold words on paper, seeing the word foreclosure underlined in red, it felt like someone had taken a knife to my chest. And the neighbors, they began whispering louder. I caught glimpses of curtains shifting whenever I walked by. And one night, I even heard laughter drifting through the street. Laughter followed by someone mocking my bold sign, repeating my words in a cruel voice, "Not for sale, not for sale." It was turning into a circus, a whole community watching me as if I was some kind of madman fighting shadows. But I wasn't crazy. I knew who was behind it. The board wanted my cabin gone, because it wasn't about the land anymore. It was about control. About showing the neighborhood what happens when you say no. So I decided to strike back in my own way. If they wanted psychological warfare, then I would give it right back. I printed my own flyers. I wrote out every shady thing the HOA had ever done, every abuse of power I had seen, every dollar they had wasted, and I stapled those flyers to trees, to poles, to fences across the neighborhood. My words screamed louder than their lies, and for the first time, people stopped avoiding me. They started reading. I could feel the shift. Some neighbors nodded at me again, almost in secret, like they understood now, like they were realizing the board wasn't protecting them, it was controlling them. But the board, they didn't take kindly to my little act of rebellion. That same night, I heard footsteps outside my cabin. When I stepped onto the porch with my lantern, I saw it. My gate had been marked with a large red X, painted sloppily, dripping down the wood like blood. The message couldn't be clearer. I was marked, a target. I stood there staring at that red X until the lantern flame began to flicker, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of fear pressing hard on my chest, because this wasn't just about papers or whispers anymore. This was about survival, and in that moment, I wondered, how far would they go to erase me, and how far would I go to make sure they failed? So let me ask you, if you saw that red X painted on your own front gate, would you pack your things and leave quietly? Or would you stand there like I did, daring them to cross the line? The red X on my gate did not fade with the rain. It stayed there, a scar on the wood, a warning I was never meant to ignore. But instead of running, I made a choice. If they wanted to watch me, I would let them. If they wanted a show, Then I would give them one. That night, I dragged an old rocking chair onto my porch. I lit a lantern beside me, and I sat facing the street, waiting. The cold wind brushed against my skin. The crickets sang their song, and the shadows shifted under the tall pines. For hours I sat there rocking, silent, my eyes wide open, never blinking too long, and I knew they were out there. Somewhere in the dark I could feel it, the weight of their stares pressing against me. Then I saw it, a glint of metal across the street. Someone was holding something, a camera, or maybe binoculars. My blood boiled. I stood up slowly and raised my voice into the night. "You want my cabin? Come and take it." The words echoed through the empty street, but no one stepped forward. The next morning, I woke up to chaos. My bold sign, the one I painted with red letters, had been ripped down and replaced. In its place stood a new board, a clean white sign with neat black letters, "For sale. Contact HOA." It felt like a punch to my chest. They were trying to erase me, as if I had never even existed. Neighbors passed by and shook their heads in silence. Some looked away, too afraid to be seen choosing a side. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I marched straight to the hardware store. I bought the biggest piece of plywood I could find, and with thick black paint I wrote the words loud and clear, "Not for sale." HOA is lying. I nailed it to my fence so hard the hammer split the wood. The sound echoed across the neighborhood like gunfire, and for the first time, I saw some neighbors smiling behind their curtains. The board didn't like that. By evening, 3 cars pulled up outside my cabin, dark-tinted windows. They didn't knock, they didn't get out, they just sat there. Engines running, headlights burning into my porch. It was intimidation at its finest, but instead of hiding inside, I walked out barefoot. Holding my lantern high, I stood in the glow of their headlights and shouted, "This cabin is mine, you can't have it." For a moment, silence, and then the driver revved the engine so loud the ground shook under my feet, but still, they didn't move forward. Eventually, one by one, the cars rolled away into the night. That was the moment I realized fear works both ways. They wanted me gone, but they were scared too, scared of how far I was willing to go, scared that I wasn't breaking. I was growing louder. Still, I knew the battle wasn't over. The board would not stop, and neither would I. But here's the question. If 3 dark cars pulled up outside your home at night, engines running, waiting, would you step outside and face them head on? Or would you stay inside and let the fear swallow you whole? The morning after the cars disappeared, I knew the fight had changed. It wasn't just about rules anymore. It was about control, about power, about who really owned this street. I made coffee, strong and bitter, and I sat on my porch staring at my bold sign, the letters still wet from the night before. Not for sale. HOA is lying. That's when I heard the sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. The HOA president herself walked down the gravel path, her heels clicking like nails on stone. She didn't smile this time. Her lips were tight, her eyes sharp like glass. She stopped in front of my fence, staring at my sign. "You're embarrassing yourself," she whispered. Her voice was cold, low, almost shaking. "This place is not yours anymore. Accept it and walk away." But I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Instead, I raised my coffee mug to my lips and spoke quietly. "Funny. That's exactly what I was going to tell you." Her face turned red, her hands clenched into fists. She leaned closer to my gate and hissed, "You don't know who you're dealing with." And for the first time, I laughed, a dry laugh that cut through the silence like a blade, because now, I did know. I knew their tricks, I knew their fear, and I knew their weakness. I stood tall and pointed at the road. 4 neighbors had stepped outside. They were watching, not hiding anymore, but watching openly. Some even nodded at me. The HOA president followed my gaze, and I saw it in her eyes, that flicker of panic, the moment she realized the control was slipping. "People are not afraid of you anymore," I said. "They see you now." She turned without another word and stormed down the path, her heels crunching faster, sharper, until she vanished into her car. That night, I heard hammering sounds. I stepped outside and found my cig. Anne was still there, but next to it, another had appeared, a fresh one. Not from me. This one said, "We stand with the cabin, one by one." More signs began to show up on lawns: no sale, our homes, our rules, stop the HOA. It spread like fire through the neighborhood. The silence had broken, and once people found their voices, there was no going back. The next HOA meeting was chaos. The president tried to speak, but the crowd shouted her down. Voices rose like thunder inside the hall. One homeowner after another stood up, telling stories. Stories of fines, harassment, intimidation, and then the vote came. A vote to remove the board. Hands shot up across the room, dozens of hands, all raised high. The president's face drained of color. The gavel slipped from her hand, and just like that, she was done. When I walked back to my cabin that night, the air felt different. Lighter, free. I sat on my porch, lantern glowing, and for the first time in months, the street was calm. No cars waiting in the dark, no shadows moving in the trees. Just peace. And the sound of crickets singing once again. I looked at the bold sign nailed to my fence. Not for sale. HOA is lying. And I smiled, because it wasn't just my fight anymore. It had become everyone's fight, and together, we had won. But here's what I wonder. If your whole neighborhood stood up against the ones in power, would you raise your hand with them, or would you stay silent and hope someone else fights for you?